the time over right now to our first speaker, Tom DeWeese.
Thank you. I hope that you will be patient for about 45 minutes because this is a very, very, very complicated issue and it can't be done in a matter of minutes. But you all know, and I know talking with you in the stands up there today, that there's great controversy taking place across the country about Agenda 21 and its policy called Sustainable Development. In nearly every community in the nation, there is now a debate raging over rules and regulations that are changing the face of our nation and of every town in our country. But you go into these meetings and you just mention Agenda 21, and elected officials will quickly put you down and accuse you of spreading conspiracy theories. Why? What's it all about? Why the denials? What is Agenda 21 and why is it a threat? For the past 3 decades, the UN and a host of environmental organizations, many of which are accredited and partially funded by the UN, have convinced most of the world that the planet is on its last legs. They will warn you that we will surely perish unless government enacts powerful rules and regulations that force people to behave in a specific way. They believe that the only way to fix the problem is to control the flow of resources and wealth, which literally means changing human civilization and the way we live. The problem is, this forced transformation of our society necessarily leads to a thirst for power and top-down control that can and will eventually lead to tyranny. Today, we are seeing vast changes in our society. People find themselves no longer secure in their own homes or on their property. People are being arrested for doing things on their property that was once their obvious right, but now is in violation of hidden, confusing regulations that result in fines and even imprisonment. For example, in Orem, Utah, Betty Perry was arrested, handcuffed, and put in a holding tank because the grass in her front yard had died. Violation, said the local zoning board. Julie Bass in Oak Park, Michigan, wanted to plant an organic garden in her yard. She even asked the mayor and the city council if it was okay, and they said sure. And when she started, she too was arrested by local zoning enforcement officers, and she now faces 90 days in jail. In Dade County, Florida, 1,500 people are losing their homes due to land use regulations. In King County, Washington, 17,000 residents have petitioned their local governments to change land use policies that have resulted in the loss of 65% of their property. And it's deafening the lack of response coming from that government. In Fauquier County, Virginia, where I reside, organic farmer Martha Badetta is facing multiple charges of fines of $5,000 on her small farm store and has been closed down, all for holding a children's birthday party on her own land because she didn't have the proper permit. It was like you having a party in your home and inviting your neighbors in. Under Fauquier County rules today, you have to have a permit for that, or you get a fine. And most recently, Martha is suffering through an IRS audit, all driven by an evil conservation group called the Piedmont Environmental Council, which runs our county. They have harassed her, worked hand in hand with the county government that they control, all because they want her land. And I just returned from Montgomery County, Ohio, where Jenny Granado and her family are the victims of the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission as they are forcing a bike path across her property. That path runs within 7 feet of her front door, and her entire front yard has now been bulldozed and removed. The house has become unlivable, and she has suffered they have offered her virtually no compensation for the government taking this land. They've given her nothing. The property was valued at $1 million, and they've offered her $23,000. The stress from this injustice as the bulldozers moved in caused Jenny's 85-year-old mom to suffer a heart attack and die. The response from the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission? Not our problem, and I'll clean this up. They said, stuff happens. Now, you add these reports to the two women who were arrested by Naperville, Illinois police for trying to protect their property from smart meter installation, and you'll begin to understand that something is very wrong in our government. Even if you believe there needs to be changes in our society to protect the environment, surely any honest American would admit that such actions by government are out of line. And that's why I and thousands of Americans now are so concerned about Agenda 21. Let me begin with some history, where this all came from. In 1976, the United Nations held the first of a series of what it called habitat conferences designed to lay the groundwork for international policy on how human society should be developed. The report delivered from the Habitat 1 conference told the world that for human society to move forward, it must give up the concept of private property ownership. Specifically, it said, quote, "Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership," it went on to say, "is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth and therefore contributes to social injustice." In other words, if you own land, that's not fair to those who don't. The concept of social justice became the driving force behind implementation of such policy. And that's the real threat of sustainable development. Social justice, or social equity as it's also called, requires that the world's wealth be shared between those who produce and those who don't. David Brower, founder of Friends of the Earth and a major UN NGO, said, "The goal now is a socialist, redistributionist society which is nature's proper steward and society's only hope." In short, social justice means a forced utopia with promises of health care for all, jobs for all, housing for all, and equality for all. It's a kumbaya hug right out of the 60s. Does that sound familiar to you? Well, Karl Marx was the first to coin the phrase social justice. After a series of meetings, finally in 1987, the United Nations sponsored the Commission on Global Governance, also called the Brundtland Commission. Its report was called Our Common Future. They've decided it for you, which concluded that developed nations, such as the United States, were responsible for global warming and poverty, which in turn created an unsustainable planet. Their solution was to limit property ownership and economic growth in the United States and transfer consumer wealth to developing nations. Last year, at the Rio Plus 20 conference in Rio de Janeiro, which was to celebrate 20 years of Agenda 21 and finish the job, there were people on that platform, officials that they had invited, who were advocating the concept of zero economic growth. Zero economic growth as our future. Of course, Barack Obama's an expert at that. The term sustainable development was first coined in the Brundtland Commission's official report, defining it as, quote, "development that meets the needs of today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs." Now, what's wrong with that? Well, to understand and effectively fight Agenda 21, you must first and foremost understand the meaning and intent of their words. Once you can translate the doublespeak into English, then you will be able to easily see the hidden agenda in any proposed policy. First, the needs the report refers to are not human needs, but those of the planet. The report concludes that the only way to meet them is by eliminating or reducing unsustainable activities globally. And get this, what are unsustainable activities? Property ownership, consumerism, high meat intake, they really hate cows, use of fossil fuels, roadways, automobiles, dams, pastures, golf courses, and more. The United Nations Biodiversity Treaty expands the list to include ski runs, grazing of livestock again, plowing of soil, building of fences, industry, single-family homes, paved and tarred roads, logging activities, dams and reservoirs, power line construction, and economic systems that fail to set proper value on the environment. Now, what economic system could that possibly be? Oh yeah, free enterprise. And as you read the Brundtland Report, it becomes clear that it is outlining a complete agenda for the reorganization of human society. It clearly calls for reduction in energy use, elimination of certain kinds of foods, as I said, beef consumption, severe reduction of space for homes and development, and actually the elimination of nation states or sovereign nations, to be replaced instead with a central organizing authority to oversee human settlements. Eventually, these ideas were worked and reworked until put together in one document called Agenda 21. And that was introduced at the 1992 Earth Summit. Now, it is true. Agenda 21 is not a treaty. It is not law of the land. Agenda 21 is what is referred to as a soft law policy designed to define, outline, propose, guide, and direct policy on international, national, state, and local levels. If completely implemented, Agenda 21 policy is designed to drastically change the very foundation of American culture, economy, and our form of government. It establishes regions based on environmental lines rather than state or community boundaries. To oversee these newly created entities, Agenda 21 proponents work with elected officials to create new governing entities in the form of non-elected regional councils. Eventually, these regional councils gain strength and influence, overpowering and essentially relegating elected government to a backseat position. This, in effect, drastically changes our American system of representative government, guided by constitutional law, and in fact creates top-down government power directed by a few. Agenda 21 was created to rearrange the world by eliminating sovereign nations, controlling consumption, natural resources use, and virtually eliminating a free market system. Above all, Agenda 21 was created with the specific purpose of redistribution of the world's wealth to be managed by international overseers under the excuse of environmental protection and poverty eradication. While Agenda 21 is not a law, it was created by non-governmental organizations, NGOs, operating under the official influence of the United Nations. And once accepted by representatives of nearly every nation on earth, including the United States, the same NGOs who wrote the soft law policy spread out over the globe, into the U.S., into Congress, into U.S. agencies, into state legislatures, and into your local community and your governments to promote, implement, and follow the guidelines specifically laid out in Agenda 21. As a result of this non-binding suggestion, it has become official policy of the federal government, nearly every state and most communities. It is being enforced through the use of presidential executive orders, congressional and state legislation, and through the use of grant programs administered through various federal and state agencies. These grants demand that certain policies, Agenda 21, be imposed as a means of complying with the grant. Through this specific implementation process, Agenda 21 has grown from a suggestion or a guideline into an all-pervasive policy in which sustainable rules and regulations are affecting property rights, local development, farming policies, energy creation and consumption, industries, and its ability to operate in this country, mode of transportation, taxes, education curriculum, and in short, nearly every aspect of our lives, just as Agenda 21 was designed to do. In fact, the agenda merges economic policy with social equity programs, all bundled under the excuse of protecting the environment. This is the 3 E's of Agenda 21. And when you combine and all of them together, the result is an all-encompassing policy that says, you must live on less. Here's how the UN described Agenda 21 in one of its own publications in 1993. Agenda 21, quote, Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on earth. It calls for specific changes in the activities of all people. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all humans, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. Agenda 21 is intended to merge those 3 E's, economy, equity, environment, into a top-down control through a planning process with predetermined outcomes designed to control money and land through a process of redistribution of wealth. That is Agenda 21. But, say your local officials, none of this has anything to do with their planning programs. They're all local, they assure you. And they accuse me and others of perpetrating a conspiracy theory full of lies and false accusations that their plans have anything to do with Agenda 21. They call Agenda 21 just an innocuous 20-year-old document that has no enforcement power, and they smugly assure us that there are no blue-helmeted troops down at City Hall. Or, as the American Planning Association says in its document, Glossary for the Public, there is no hidden agenda. In its Agenda 21 Myths and Facts document found on the APA website, the group goes to extreme measures to distance itself with all and policies from Agenda 21, saying specifically, quote, the American Planning Association has no affiliation regarding any policy goals or recommendations of the United Nations. Really? Well, then it would be interesting to hear the APA explain this bit of information found in one of its own documents from 1994. A newsletter for Northern California. The document of the American American Planning Association has an article in it that says, how sustainable is our planning? This is 1 year after Agenda 21 was introduced. It was written in the document. It says, quote, here, the 5th paragraph, quote, Vice President Moore's book, Earth in the Balance, addressed many of the general issues of sustainability. Within the past year, the President's Council on Sustainable Development has been organized to develop recommendations for incorporating sustainability into federal government. Also, various groups have been formed to implement Agenda 21, a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable development that was adopted at the recent UN conference in Rio de Janeiro, the Earth Summit. That is Agenda 21. In that one paragraph, this document of the American Planning Association brings together the American Planning Association, Agenda 21, the UN's Earth Summit, Al Gore, Sustainable Development, the President's Council on Sustainable Development, NGO groups with the specific mission of implementing Agenda 21 in our local communities, and the description of Agenda 21 as a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable planning. Apparently, in 1994, the American Planning Association didn't think of Agenda 21 as just an innocuous document with no consequences. They were pretty excited about it. And a couple of paragraphs higher in the article, it says, quote, a common misconception is that sustainability is synonymous with self-sufficiency. On the contrary, it says, sustainability must recognize the interconnections between different levels of societal structure. That societal structure is social justice, as described in Agenda 21. And if you visit, those of you rush home with your computers, go to plannersnetwork.org. Plannersnetwork.org, which the APA is a member, you will find in its statement of principles this quote: "We believe planning should be a tool for allocating resources and eliminating the great inequalities of wealth and power in our society because the free market has proven incapable of doing this." This is the statement of principles that your local planners and their so-called local plans adhere to. The United Nations blatantly advocates that capitalism and private property rights are not sustainable and pose the single greatest threat to the world's ecosystem and social equity. And as the planner's statement of principles and the APA's own 1994 documents show, the APA is helping communities across the nation enforce these ideas while swearing it's all a local idea designed with local input. That, of course, would explain why this quote by J. Gary Lawrence, a planner from the city of Seattle and an advisor to the President's Council on Sustainable Development, when he said, quote, "Participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any elected official undertaking Local Agenda 21. So, we will call our process something else, like comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth." Well, as George Orwell masterfully put it in his epic novel Animal Farm, it's becoming difficult to see the differences between the pigs and the farmers or the APA and the United Nations. So, how is it done? How does an international agenda slip into our nation, into your community, without most people, even your elected officials, knowing about it? Here is the exact course that brought Agenda 21 to America through Congress, through your state legislature, through your local county and city government, and into your backyard. Over 50,000 leaders, non-governmental organizations, government bureaucrats, and 179 heads of state signed agreement to Agenda 21 at the Earth Summit in 1992, including George H.W. Bush for the United States. The policy then gained huge momentum when in 1993, President Bill Clinton issued Executive Order 12852 to create the President's Council on Sustainable Development and made it official U.S. policy. Take a look at who served on that council, and you will see many of the same NGOs which helped write Agenda 21 at the UN. They include Jonathan Lash of the World Resources Institute, John Sawhill of the Nature Conservancy, Jay Hare of the National Wildlife Federation, Michelle Perrault, International Vice President of the Sierra Club. All players in the creation of Agenda 21, now openly serving on the President's Council with a specific mission of implementing Agenda 21 into American policy. And through a series of regulations, executive orders, and grant programs on the federal level, written and pushed through Congress by those same NGOs who wrote Agenda 21 at the international level, the policy has filtered down into state governments, which with NGO pressure pass regulations telling local communities that they must impose comprehensive development plans. Then, as the local communities were faced with the task of writing such plans, your elected officials, county commissioners are going, "Oh, what? A comprehensive development plan? What is that?" In comes the NGOs, say, "Do not fear. We have it for you." They've got Agenda 21 in a box, a whole new government, all right here. Just sign, press real hard, there's several copies. Come conveniently armed with it all and with the grants. And the grant money is the key. It is how such policy infiltrates every single community. Any city that takes the grants agrees to the strings attached. The strings are controls on energy and water use, controls on development, and much more. Essentially, these programs lead to control of your property and your local economy right out of Agenda 21. But, say your local planners, those grants aren't connected to some innocuous UN document called Agenda 21. Really? Then please explain this. This is from the 1998 Federal Register on the EPA's Sustainable Development Challenge Grant Program. This is from the Federal Register. It says, quote, "The Sustainable Development Challenge Grant Program is also a step in implementing Agenda 21, the Global Plan for Action on Sustainable Development." And still, the same NGOs deny an Agenda 21 connection. There are literally thousands of NGO planning groups and agencies working in every single community in the nation to implement Agenda 21 policy. But there is one international organization that stands above the rest. Meet ICLEI. Originally known as the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. Today, the group simply calls itself ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. They needed to get that word international out of their name. ICLEI's mission is to implement Agenda 21 worldwide, and it's been having tremendous success. When local governments contract with ICLEI, they agree to implement the Agenda 21 policy of sustainable development. In fact, these local governments are agreeing to much more than that. It's important to note that ICLEI's charter asks that its individual members, your communities that pay dues to them, so that they adopt the Earth Charter principles to guide local action. The Earth Charter, what is that? It's an international declaration first introduced to the world in 1997, written by a task force headed by former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and Maurice Strong, the head of the 1992 Earth Summit where Agenda 21 was born. The Earth Charter calls for the emergence of a global civil society and states that our environmental, economic, political, social, and spiritual challenges are interconnected. And keep that in mind when you get involved in the issue of Common Core for our new curriculum in our schools. A global civil society, right out of the Earth Charter. And there are those 3 E's again. For that clearly stated agenda, ICLEI supplies the tools to fully indoctrinate employees at City Hall to assure only sustainable policies are considered. And that's how energy quotas and land use policies are created. But keep in mind, your community does not have to be an ICLEI member to be affected by Agenda 21 and ICLEI policies. I get calls from people saying, oh, we're safe, we're not an ICLEI member. Not true. Around the nation, ICLEI partners with more than 2,000 NGO groups, including the American Planning Association. Nearly every single town uses the American Planning Association's Growing Smart guidebook that translate Agenda 21 into local policy. These groups work hand in hand with government organizations like the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which has adopted the Earth Charter as its official policy. The National Governors Association, the National League of Cities, the National Association of County Administrators, and more that your elected representatives belong to. The planners bring pre-written programs and regulations directly to your elected officials, saving them the trouble of having to write the plans because it's all organized for them. There are international regulations for plumbing, electric wiring, building codes, development codes, energy use, water use, traffic calming for street development, and the ever-popular bike lanes. Your elected officials don't have to think. They just have to hit the rubber stamp. And like magic, you have a whole new local government. Is it any wonder that they walk around in a daze denying they have anything to do with Agenda 21? They don't have a clue. And what are the results of this internationally created, federally funded, and state-enforced assault on your local community and your home? Property rights are disappearing. Energy costs are skyrocketing. Jobs are disappearing. Community development means pack and stack high-rise housing, and bike paths are infringing on roads, making it much more difficult to drive your car. Wetlands, conservation easements, watersheds, view sheds, rails to trails, biosphere reserves, greenways, carbon footprints, partnerships, preservation, stakeholders, land, environmental protection, development, diversity, visioning, open space, heritage areas, and the comprehensive planning are all part of the new language of government. You've heard them all, haven't you? The function of legitimate elected government within the sustainable system is fast becoming little more than a rubber stamp to create and enforce the dictates of something called stakeholder councils run, you guessed it, by the same NGO organizations that wrote Agenda 21 in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the demise of representative government, and the councils appear almost overnight. You'll find watersheds that regulate human action near every trickling stream or river or lake. Meters are put on wells. Special action councils control home size, tree pruning, or even the color you can paint your home or the height of your grass. And that's how innocent victims like Betty Perry go to jail in handcuffs because her grass died. Once the councils are established, it becomes much more difficult to discuss issues with your elected representatives. Instead, they will automatically refer you to the proper council or administration or department run by unresponsive appointed hacks armed with their own private political agendas. Regional governments are driven by the NGOs and stakeholder councils. They are run by non-elected bureaucrats that don't answer to the people. One of the most popular tools now to control energy use is the energy audit and building review. They establish quotas for electrical use, for heating and cooling pumps and water use. You will be given a list of recommendations necessary to bring your home into compliance. These may include the need for a new roof, new energy efficiency appliances, new windows, and to comply may cost you thousands of dollars. In Oakland, California, they put these programs together. The average cost to the homeowner to comply with these regulations was $35,000. And as they say in the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission, stuff happens. As groups like ICLEI and the American Planning Association guide the process, voluntary guidelines announced to reduce energy quickly become mandatory regulations as dictated through the grant programs. And how do they control energy use? Well, here's one way. Many of you are aware of this. Across the nation, power companies in partnership with government planners are forcing the use of smart meters. These meters contain RFID chips. The technology enables the power company to keep track of how much power you are using and control, regulate, and ration your use of the electricity. There are now policies being advocated to place taxes on the use of toilet paper and on the number of miles that you drive in your car. This is a big project in the Obama administration, keeping track of the miles that you drive, and at the end of the year, they send you a bill for how many miles you drove. That's in the works. The EPA is now providing funding to NGO groups to run training programs for people to photograph and report neighbors who may be committing crimes against the environment. Last year, Obama signed Executive Order 13575 to create the White House Rural Council. The council is a list of the most aggressive agencies and departments of the U.S. government. It will bring an army of regulators into rural areas to completely control every decision of land use, farming, and development. Sustainable farming practices, which by the way is not organic farming, can only follow strict guidelines set down by government bureaucrats. They dictate how crops are to be grown, how much energy, water, and fertilizer can be used, even which crops can be grown. Farmers who have been feeding America for over 200 years will not be able to make a single decision without permission and massive paperwork from bureaucrats from at least 25 agencies. This is direct enforcement of sustainable farming, and the result can only be food shortages and higher prices. The governor of Maryland is enforcing an agenda called Plan Maryland that will lock away over 400,000 acres of land banned from any development. One of the key provisions of this policy is to ban septic tanks as a means to protect the Chesapeake Bay, even though there's no evidence that septic tanks do any damage whatsoever. The only result of that ban can be to make it impossible to live in rural areas. Getting people off the rural lands and into cities is the real purpose, not environmental protection. Several cities are now taking grant money to create a plug-in development program using your tax dollars to assure the city is ready for electric cars. The program openly admits that it's all necessary because otherwise people won't buy plug-in vehicles. Let's just ask Chevy how the Volt's doing. At least under the free enterprise system, the oil companies paid for their own filling stations after free Americans made their own choice of what car to buy. And finally, there's this. The Obama administration is now moving to reshape neighborhoods to enforce diversity. If your neighborhood, under this policy, doesn't have enough of a certain kind of minority, then you may be forced to sell your home to that specific minority to assure that government set diversity quotas. Do you know what that will do to the real estate industry? Welcome to the utopia of sustainable development. The fact is, we oppose Agenda 21 and sustainable development because it was specifically designed not to protect the environment, but to change the very structure of our country, of our government. It was designed to harmonize the United States and other free countries into a one-size-fits-all global structure, eliminating sovereign nations. Through the establishment of non-elected councils and regional governments, they are creating a government structure that essentially eliminates our precious style of representative government by the people. And they are replacing it with a vicious, backroom, corruption-infested cronyism between non-elected, self-professed stakeholders and non-governmental organizations pushing their preconceived agenda through power-hungry, greedy, or just plain stupid politicians. The answer now is, how do we stop it? The fact is, we must understand the nature of the threat we face. This is a political movement led by those who seek to control the economy, dictate development, and redistribute wealth. They use the philosophical base of Karl Marx, the tactics of Adolf Hitler, and the rhetoric of the Sierra Club. Basically, everything connected with sustainable development translates to higher costs, shortages, and sacrifice. Some citizens have actually been thrown out of public meetings by armed guards simply because they want to discuss how a regulation is going to affect their property or their livelihood. Nameless, faceless bureaucrats wielding power in the back rooms, untouchable and unseen, is not freedom. There is nothing on, in, over, or under the earth that doesn't fall under the purview of some part of Agenda 21. But we who oppose it, frankly, don't accept the premise that we must destroy our human civilization in order to protect the environment. We believe in free markets and free societies where people make their own decisions and develop their own property. And we fully believe that the true path for a strong protection of the environment is through private property ownership and limited government. Those who promote Agenda 21 do not believe in those ideas, and so we will not agree on the path for the future. In short, our fight is a clash of the age-old philosophy of life: freedom to live as you choose, or control by an unseen few. There is very little middle ground. The United States has never been part of a global village in which the rules for life have been handed down by some self-appointed village elders. We are a nation of laws that were designed to protect our rights to our property and our individual life choices while keeping government reined in. We oppose Agenda 21 precisely because it is an agenda to transform our nation into the exact opposite view of government. Now, after all I've told you about Agenda 21, it may seem impossible to defeat. But over the past 2 years, something amazing has begun. In cities and towns across the nation, real opposition is beginning to stir. Thousands of Americans are now engaged in this battle. Already, more than 150 American cities have ended their membership in ICLEI. At least 7 state legislatures have introduced anti-sustainable legislation, and even the Republican Party has included the anti-Agenda 21 language in its platform. A revolution has begun. And if we can maintain freedom in our own community, we can do it as a nation. At a recent international meeting, ICLEI was expressing its frustration, holding their heads, saying they can't get new member cities, especially in the United States, because you and I have made ICLEI and sustainable development political poison, and cities are refusing to join. The American Planning Association is in a panic. unable to understand how we have made this a national movement. APA is conducting boot camps to train their people to combat our little ragtag band. They are changing documents and tactics. Their arrogance and their bullying tactics are starting to show in public meetings, and people are taking notice and taking action. We are winning battles across this nation. We are stopping their once hidden development plans. We are disrupting their planning meetings, and we are going after anti-sustainable development legislation is introduced into more and more legislatures and city councils across the nation, and as I said, they are in a panic. We fight sustainable development to stop the erosion of our liberties and our way of life, and to restore the American system of government and justice. We are starting to move the rock of freedom uphill. And so for the first time, since I started down the road to expose Agenda 21 more than 20 years ago, I can clearly see that if we stay vigilant and vigorous, if we refuse to hang our heads in despair, and if we take the offensive, we will succeed in crushing it. Thank you very much.